So today we continue with how to meditate. How to meditate is a very broad topic. You can discuss it in roughly, generally, with a summary. You can also go very deep into it. And I have been trying to give a broad summary, but more and more I think that maybe we should get a little deeper now into the core of the meditation. Last time we said that meditation is basically in two major parts, two major portions, or two major parts, or you can say, I don't want to use the word traditions, maybe in two major aspects of it. So meditation, is just as a brief review, is in concentration and contemplation. The Sanskrit word is samatha and vipassana. And we said that, just to give an example, we've been using anapanasati, anpo shou yi, anapanasati, in and out breath. And in the concentration part and the contemplation part, we practice satipatthana. Satipatthana is introspection, internal introspection, reflection in your own mind internally. It's not going out, attaching all objects that you are interacting with. It's introspection, which is within the mind. And we said, as a review, we said that, we use a summary, the object of concentration is the breath, and we focus on the in and out breath. And satipatthana, we have the four introspections of the mind. Some people use mindfulness. And mindfulness, many philosophers, many enlightened, more or less, enlightened monks, they don't like to use the word mindfulness. They like to use the word introspection, because mindfulness, the English word mindfulness seems to be that the mind has to be filled with something. The mind has to have thoughts of something. But introspection is to empty your mind. How can your mind be full? Mindful is the mind full? No, it's not. It's not the mind filling up the mind, no. Clearing your mind, emptying your mind of all this, using that word garbage. Clearing your mind of all this garbage. And so, we use the word introspections. And contemplation is again a word that is close to introspection. So it's introspection of the body, introspection of feeling, introspection of mind, and just introspection of mind impressions. Mind impressions is inside. So all this we have to deal with. But we have been talking about the object of concentration, which we briefly know about it. But now we should jump a little bit to introspection now. But according to many sutras, before you actually get into satipatthana, which is introspection of the mind, you need certain prerequisite conditions before you get into introspection of the mind. And we call it skillful means. Skillful means that stabilize the mind before you even get into introspection. Sometimes we just jump into introspection. Actually, that's not the right way. According to sutras, you really have to have some prerequisites, some preparation before you get into meditation. And one of the prerequisites is you have to have a morality standard. You have to know the parameters of what is wrong and what is right before you meditate. All these we need to talk about. So now that you know concentration and contemplation. Before concentration and contemplation, you have to have a prerequisite preparing, the 5 prerequisites before you get into Satipatthana. We haven't talked about that before, but we really need to know about it. Otherwise, you're just wandering, at the door without entering into meditation. So let's get to know a little bit more details about the 5 methods of calming the mind first before you even get into introspection. How do we do it? As prerequisites for the 4 introspections of the mind, one should practice the 5 methods of calming the mind, which are preliminary, basic, skillful means that help us to detach from wandering thoughts, bringing the mind to a single pointed state, one pointed state. Having achieved samadhi, or concentration, we can contemplate the 4 introspections and thus generate prajna, which is wisdom. The 5 methods of calming or stilling the mind. The first one is contemplating the breath. Second one is contemplating the impurity of the body. 3, contemplating loving kindness. 4, contemplating causes and conditions. And 5th, contemplating the limits of phenomena, or contemplating the name of a Buddha, depending on the tradition. So what is actually the 5 methods of calming the mind? Let's talk about the first one. Remember, you need a decision tree to learn all these things, because when you get into one subject, you forget about where does it come from. The decision tree is meditation requires samatha and vipassana. Samatha is focus, concentration, right? Just the focus, concentration. Vipassana is contemplating, introspection. It goes deeper. And sometimes you need a combination of both. So concentration and contemplation is 2 sides of the same coin. A coin cannot go with just one side. Sometimes you need contemplation in concentration. Sometimes you need contemplation in concentration. It's like the wings of 2 birds. You can just talk about one without talking the other. But why do we separate it? Just to emphasize the topic first. Just to emphasize concentration first, but then we stop introspection for a while and talk about concentration. But actually, you can separate the 2. We separate them for the purpose of discussion, for the purpose of talking about it. But you cannot say, okay, I concentrate first, I focus first, and then I go introspection. You cannot really focus without understanding, without wisdom, without contemplation. So both goes hand in hand. So let's talk about the breath. So we said concentration and contemplation. The Buddha repeatedly say we should use the breath as the object. Meditation is in and out breath. And concentration involves 3 topics in it, and contemplation involves another 3. Concentration training is counting, following, and stabilization. And contemplation requires introspection, returning, and purification. So remember these 6. We call it the 6 superior doors to meditation. These are the doors to meditation. All right? Let's venture into the first one, counting. Just this one, counting. So you remember the decision tree. Meditation, you have concentration, contemplation, and now we talk about counting. I've been saying, okay, count, but you don't, why do I have to count? And some people simply don't follow counting. because I can't read your mind. My experience is 50% of the 100, you tell them to count, they just sit there chanting their own Mali Bame home, or they sit there peacefully. You don't know what is in their mind. They just don't want to follow you. They're not faithful enough to follow you. They think that, well, why do I have to count? Counting is a method spoken by the Buddha, not me. Spoken by the Buddha. Counting. The Buddha already screened all the procedure and say, use the breath, and counting is the preliminary. If you can't even count, you can't go following. If you cannot follow, you cannot go stabilization. If you cannot go stabilization, you cannot go introspection. If you cannot use introspection, you cannot go returning. If you cannot go returning, you can't even get to purification. Now, this is procedural. Within procedural, sometimes you can jump from counting to purification, or you can jump counting to returning. But these are more or less the procedures that you have to go through. Okay, let us venture into, I like to use the word venture because it's interesting. I like to get to venture into counting. What is in counting? Now we're still using the breath. You should know why we want to use the breath as the object. There are a lot of reasons for it. Okay. In and out breath. Counting. Counting the in-breath or the out-breath, but not both. Count from 1 to 10, and then resume from 1 to 10 again. In other words, habitually I'm used to counting the in-breath, so I say, in-breath. I'm breathing in, then I count 1. Breathing out, I don't count. I'm breathing in again, I count 2. Breathing out, I don't count. So I only count the in-breath. Why? There are reasons for it. You won't get confused. You won't get too abrupt. So in, you count the in-breath. Or you can count the out-breath. In other words, I'm not counting the in-breath. I'm in, breathing in, I don't count. Out, 1. I'm breathing in again, I don't count. Out, I count 2. I'm breathing in again, I don't count. Out, I count 3. You understand what I'm talking about? If you don't understand what I'm talking about, raise your hands. You don't understand? You understand? Okay, good, okay. Okay. So you count either the in-breath or the out-breath. Now, why don't we do it like this? Why don't we just stop for 1 minute and you close your eyes and you count your in-breath. In other words, in, you count 1, out, you don't count. In, count 2, out, you don't count. Until you come to 10, and then we continue. Okay? All right? Now let's meditate. Be very faithful. Count your breath. Don't just sit there doing nothing. Don't waste your time. You breathe in, you count 1. Breathe out, you don't count. Up to 10. Okay? I finished counting 10 breaths. But some people are actually, you may have finished a long time ago. Because why? Every breath is different. Some breath is longer, some breath is shorter. Some breath is deeper, some breath is shallow. Some breath is noisy, some breath is quiet. Some breath is subtle, some breath is coarse. Because every breath is a little different. And there are criteria for a good breath. We go down there, we know that there's criteria for an enlightened, more or less enlightened breath. Okay, let's go down. Count from 1 to 10, and then resume from 1 to 10. If you lose your count due to interruption from wandering thoughts, resume the count again from 1 to 10. Sometimes when you're counting, you lose your count. You think about yesterday. You worry about tomorrow. You think about what am I going to have for lunch? You're going to go, where am I going after this meditation sitting? So you could be disturbed, interrupted by wandering thoughts. You lose your count. What do then? You come back to the count again. You lose it, you come back to it. It requires training. Meditation is not just one Saturday afternoon and then I go there and relax myself. And what do you mean by training? I don't like training. It's dogmatic. Training is control. I don't like that on a Saturday morning. No, we require training. Meditation is training of the mind. You need to put your efforts into it. If you don't put your efforts into it, you can't do meditation. Okay, breathe. Next, breathe spontaneously as you're breathing from time to time. Do not make your breath longer or shorter. Be natural. Do not count beyond 10. Don't count beyond 10 because you're confused by the number. From 1 to 10 only. Don't count 102, 104, 116. Oh, did I count 116 or 115? Don't do that. Only from 1 to 10. The breath is continuously living with the mind. You have the breath, you have the mind. They're brothers. They can't leave each other. The mind is the breath is the mind. If the breath is deep, smooth, quiet, subtle, and long, that could indicate that the mind is more stabilizing than living with a breath that is short, interrupted, noisy, and what? Rough. So, if your breath has changed from noisy to being quiet, from shallow to deep, from short to long, etc., etc., that means you're on your way in tranquility. And according to many classical Chinese medicine sutras, beings, human beings, or even beings whose breath is long, subtle, quiet, uninterrupted, they usually live longer than animals, than beings with short, interrupted, noisy breath. A dog only lives for 15 years, right? How did a dog breathe? That's how they breathe, right? A horse, animals that their breath is short, interrupted, noisy, not subtle, they live a shorter life. So in other words, if your breath is subtle, insubstantial, quiet, deep, long, you will enjoy a longer life. So the breath is absolutely important. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Okay, now, counting. According to the Buddha, if counting is successfully achieved, the following effects will manifest. Through relying on counting the breaths, the practitioner gains the ability to manifest the 4 dhyanas, the 4 immeasurable minds, and the 4 formless absorptions. For those who despise or underestimate breath meditation, you should see this. This practice is enough to lead you to the 4 dhyanas, to the 4 immeasurable minds, and the 4 formless absorptions. Now, what does this mean? I'm not going to go into full explanation because it takes time. Suffice it to say, this training is enough to lead you to samadhi. Just this training is enough to lead you there. This is what the Buddha said about what we can achieve just by counting. So be faithful to the practice. Counting first. Don't just do anything else. I can't read your mind because I know that according to my experiences, when you tell them to count, some of them sleep through, some of them think about something else, some of them even say, Om Mani Padme Hum, Mani Padme Hum, Mani Padme Hum, quietly in their mind. They just chant Om Mani Padme Hum. Or they just do what they want. Counting. Okay, next. When we say counting, the sutra breaks it down into two parts. Count, cultivation. Cultivating count. Cultivation is the cause and realization is the effect. So cause will not lead to the effect. First we go into the cultivation of it. How do you do it? The practitioner regulates and harmonizes the breath so that it is neither too rough nor too subtle, counting unhurriedly and slowly from 1 to 10. One focuses the mind on the counting and does not allow it to wander off or become scattered. So your job actually is quite simple. Count from 1 to 10. When you wander off into all directions, come back again. Training, training, training. Until your breath is what? Until your breath is very silent. Until your breath is long and deep. Until your breath is insubstantial. Until your breath is subtle. Until your breath is so fine that you don't even notice it. You're breathing, but you don't even notice it. You know when you notice your breath? Clearly notice your breath? When you have a flu. You can't breathe. How do you realize? What's the realization coming out of the cultivation? After the mind stabilizes in the counting, the practitioner feels that the breath becomes insubstantial, subtle. Insubstantial is subtle. It's not substance anymore. It's not a breath anymore. You can feel it. It's so fine, so subtle. It becomes so subtle and fine. Then he becomes concerned that counting has become a coarse activity, not subtle enough. He feels that his mind is more at peace for finer activity in his breath than counting. Then he should switch to following. So in other words, some people say, I've been meditating for 5 years. And where would I go from here? I don't know. How do I go from here? You know yourself. When you count, when your counting has become so insubstantial, so subtle, so successfully completed, you will find that even the counting is something that disturbs you. Before counting is the thoughts that come to your mind, all the wandering thoughts, thoughts of depression, thoughts of anxiety, fear, hatred, greediness, jealousy, all kinds of thoughts come up to disturb your counting. But now all those thoughts will detach from you. You don't have those passion, mental afflictions thought anymore. You don't have depression anymore. You don't have greediness anymore. You don't have nothing of that. You only have the counting. This counting is subtle. And then, when you go a little gradually, you will find that even the counting is a thought that I don't like. Even the counting is not fine enough. The counting is not subtle enough. I don't want to be disturbed by the counting. Then you do what? Then you should quit counting and go into following. So that's the second stage of the game. If we call it a game, the second stage. Counting is the first stage. You don't go into the second stage when you haven't successfully completed the first stage of counting. So then you go into following. Following. So how do we cultivate following? How do we realize following? The practitioner relinquishes counting and relies single-mindedly on following the coming in and going out of the breath, remaining free of any distraction and scatteredness of his focus. What does that mean? Now you don't count anymore because the count is too coarse an activity. What do? You follow the breath through. Now the breath comes into my nostrils, or it hits the nostrils. It wriggles my hair, the hair in my nostrils. I can feel it, and it gets to my throat. Now it comes down to my lung. It gets down, all the way down. It permeates my body, and it goes to my belly button, It permeates everywhere. You follow the breath. You actually, in detail, follow the track of the breath. In detail, as much detail as you should. You don't count anymore. You follow your breath because the breath permeates into every body cells, permeates in all directions. You follow it until, some people follow it under the throat, under the lung, and then it goes all the way through. You know what? You can even follow the biology of your body. Get into Google and get out the map, the biological function of the body. Where does the breath gets in? Do you follow biologically where the breath goes through until it hits the ocean of breath, which is approximately 2 or 3 inches underneath the belly button? You know where the belly button is? Underneath the belly button. Because you cannot, because when you follow it, the breath is not so long that you can follow it for 5 minutes. So it has to stop somewhere because it would go out again. When it comes out, you follow it how it comes out because you follow the in and out. Unless your breath is really deep, your following will not be too long. But you have to follow it, follow your breath, and don't let it leave you. Follow your breath wherever it will go. Follow it closely. No other thoughts, no wandering thoughts, just following. And because of the following of the breath, the practitioner becomes able to what? Develop the 16 superior phenomena. When you are successfully following, at that time, you know that you're on your way. Don't say, where do I go from here? That automatically you know where to go. You don't need anybody to tell you. And then what happened? 16 phenomena will come out. Then you know that your following is successful. How do you judge that your following is successful? 16 superior phenomena will come out. I can't go through every one, but I just show you now so that we can talk about it next time. What are the 16? Awareness that the breath is coming in, awareness that the breath is going out, awareness that the breath is long or short, awareness that the breath permeates the body, relinquishing all physical actions, mental experiences of joy, mental experiences of bliss, experiences of mental actions. I need to explain every one of this in the next session. And then also the mental production of joy, the mental development of concentration, the mental generation of liberation, the contemplation of impermanence, the contemplation of dispassion, the contemplation of abandonment of desire, the contemplation of cessation, the contemplation of renunciation. Every one of these require explanation, which I will do next time. Let's have a review, because we need a decision tree to you to look at, an analytical decision tree. You have meditation, and then you have concentration and contemplation. Before you do concentration and contemplation, you need 5 methods to stabilize the mind. And the first method is counting, which later also coincides with the concentration of counting. So that, and in talking about each method, counting and following, we have 2 aspects to talk about it. How to do it, what comes out of it. How to do it is the cultivation part of it. What comes out of it is the realization part of it. Now you know the decision tree? All right, so we'll talk about next time.